Congressional investigators are currently examining a high-stakes sequence of events involving federal oversight, international trade agreements, and a documented timeline that has raised significant questions in Washington. At the center of the inquiry is a private meeting held in early April 2025 between Matthew Maroon, whose family owns the Ambassador Bridge, and United States Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick. The Ambassador Bridge currently functions as the busiest commercial land border crossing in North America, serving as a critical economic artery for freight moving between Windsor, Ontario, and Detroit, Michigan. For decades, this privately owned infrastructure has maintained a near-total monopoly on commercial truck traffic at the crossing. This dominance is now being challenged by the Gordie Howe International Bridge, a multi-billion-dollar, publicly funded project backed by a binding international treaty between the United States and Canada. While the new bridge is designed to introduce competition, improve safety, and increase efficiency, it also threatens the financial interests associated with the Maroon family's existing monopoly. The timeline under investigation shows that within hours of the private meeting between Maroon and Secretary Lutnick, President Donald Trump issued a public statement on social media threatening to block the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge. This project represents years of diplomatic coordination and substantial financial investment aimed at strengthening cross-border trade. The swiftness of the president's threat following the meeting has triggered a formal oversight inquiry, with investigators now demanding access to emails, text messages, and calendar records to determine the nature of the discussions. The investigation aims to clarify whether the administration's sudden opposition to a treaty-backed infrastructure project was based on national policy or influenced by the private business interests of a single family. As the situation develops, the focus remains on the documented sequence of events and the potential implications for the rules-based international trade order. The formal inquiry into the meeting between Matthew Maroon and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has expanded into a significant legislative and legal confrontation within the United States Congress. Representative Robert Garcia, a member of the House Oversight Committee, has initiated a legal mechanism to compel the production of all internal communications, including emails and encrypted messages, associated with the early April meeting. This demand is not a symbolic gesture, but an exercise of institutional oversight intended to determine the specific content of the discussions that preceded the president's social media post. Joining this effort, Michigan Representative Rasheeda Tlaib has publicly characterized the situation as billionaire corruption, pointing to the disparity between the aging infrastructure of the privately owned Ambassador Bridge and the modern, safety-oriented design of the Gordie Howe International Bridge. Tlaib's public statements reflect a growing concern among lawmakers that federal policy may have been leveraged to protect a private revenue stream at the expense of regional economic safety and competition. Further intensifying the response, Representative Hillary Scholten of Michigan has introduced the Michigan-Canada Partnership Act. This legislation is specifically drafted to prevent any federal interference with the scheduled opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge, effectively attempting to codify the bridge's operational status and protect it from unilateral executive action. The introduction of this bill suggests that lawmakers view the threat to the bridge not as a hypothetical scenario, but as an operational risk that requires a legislative firewall. These congressional actions highlight a deepening divide over the use of executive power in private business disputes. While the administration has yet to release the requested records, the pressure from the House Oversight Committee and the introduction of preemptive legislation indicate that the controversy has moved beyond public rhetoric and into the realm of formal, legal, and legislative accountability. The core of the investigation remains focused on whether the weight of the American presidency was deployed to sustain a private monopoly that handles approximately 25% of all land-based trade between the United States and Canada. Legal experts and sources familiar with international infrastructure agreements note that the presidential threat to block the Gordie Howe International Bridge faces significant statutory and diplomatic hurdles. The bridge is governed by a binding international treaty between the United States and Canada, a framework that does not grant the executive branch unilateral authority to halt operations once formal diplomatic approvals and funding have been executed. Despite this legal reality, the political signaling has created immediate economic uncertainty. The Windsor-Detroit corridor is the most commercially significant land border crossing globally, facilitating approximately $200 billion in annual trade. Logistics experts indicate that even the perception of a delay can disrupt highly integrated supply chains, particularly in the automotive sector, where components move across the border with precise frequency. A reduction in crossing efficiency at this node would likely result in production slowdowns and increased costs for manufacturers and consumers across North America. In response to the administration's stance, Canadian officials and regional stakeholders have maintained a strategy of institutional adherence. Mark Carney and other Canadian representatives have relied on existing treaty mechanisms and the support of bipartisan American lawmakers to ensure the project remains on schedule. While the operational readiness of the Gordie Howe Bridge continues to advance, the broader consequences of this dispute remain centered on the integrity of public infrastructure. Congressional investigators have signaled that the outcome of this inquiry will hinge on the production of the withheld records. Whether the bridge opens as scheduled or faces further political interference, the case has established a precedent regarding the intersection of private lobbying and federal trade policy. The ongoing investigation will determine if the recorded timeline constitutes a breach of protocol, with the findings expected to be entered into the formal congressional record. For more updates on this developing story and further reporting on international trade oversight, subscribe to our news service.